Was a giant in the legal community, and his son, Christopher Scalia, has edited a book called Scalia Speaks, Reflections on Law, Faith, and the Love, and a Life Well Lived. Christopher Scalia, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on with you guys.
First, let's talk about the book. You compiled all of his speeches and sort of condensed it into one book?
Yes, that's right. My co-editor and I, Ed Whalen, who used to clerk for my father, read through probably about 200 of my father's speeches and gathered the few dozen that we think would be most interesting to a general audience. So people who are interested in him, interested in law, but not necessarily experts. So there are about a dozen speeches about the law in which he explains his legal philosophy, but most of the speeches are about different subjects than that. So we think that it's a great variety of subject matter for general readers.
Growing up the son of a famous American, you should write a book, right? Because he was reading your homework, helping you with baseball, then you turn on the TV and he'd be in the middle of some giant controversy.
It is weird that it was I loved the life my father's profession gave him, and I loved the childhood I had. I don't want to complain about it, but it had its weird moments for exactly those reasons. But, growing up in D.C., there were a lot of other people who were in similar situations. I went to high school with congressmen's kids and senators' kids, and so I wasn't the only one in that boat. But, yeah, it had its weird moments.
The book is called Scalia Speaks, Christopher Scalia, our guest. And in this time where nobody can agree on what day of the week it is, I always took great solace in the fact that your father and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were not just friendly, but were the best of friends.
They had a great friendship. Both of the couples, her husband Marty and my mother, were also very close friends, and they would go to parties together. They had an annual New Year's party that they all looked forward to every year. They focused on what they had in common. They loved opera, they loved good food, they loved good wine, and that's enough to build a friendship on, really.
She also wrote the foreword for the book.
That's right. She wrote a very moving foreword. We're really grateful that she took the time to do that. And the collection also includes a roast my father delivered to then Judge Ginsburg in the early 90s before she was on the Supreme Court, because they had been on a lower court together for some time. It's a very funny roast. He pokes fun at her, but the last paragraph is very moving and is a beautiful testament and tribute to their friendship.
It's nice to see that they could disagree on an opinion on the biggest issue of the day, and yet let that not get in the way of their friendship.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'd go even further than that. They would help each other write opinions. They would, justices send drafts of their opinions around, and if they found mistakes or ways that the other could improve their argument, even though they disagreed with the argument, they would bring it up and talk to each other about it. And I think that's just a great tribute to their friendship and their working relationship.
The book is called Scalia Speaks, Reflections on Law, Faith, and Life Well Lived, edited by his son, Christopher Scalia. So your father was a strict constitutionalist, and when you were growing up and he wanted to send you to bed, had a curfew at 10 o'clock, did you ever say to him, "Hey, Dad, that's not in the Constitution"?
Well, I knew better than trying that. No, he was. My mother did most of the heavy lifting at home, as my father freely acknowledged over the course of their marriage. He was I don't know. I didn't need much correcting. I took my parents seriously and did what they told without much back talk. The real gripe for me was all the yard work he had us do, and I wasn't able to get out of that until I discovered an allergy to bees once when I was mowing the lawn, and that was my get out of jail free card from then on.
Now you have 8 brothers and sisters?
That's correct. Yeah, there are 9 of us total.
Are you all strict constitutionalists, or were there pretty good fights at the dinner table?
Well, he was the constitutional expert, so we didn't mix it up with him too much. Our political conversations, we had political conversations. I would say most of us, are pretty conservative, but we still found ways to disagree with each other because we're family, and that's what families do. So the discussion at dinner tables would get heated, but fun, always pretty fun, and we definitely find things to disagree about, if not the Constitution.
I am curious for this book. Do you have a favorite speech in the book? And whatever it is, why would you choose it?
Well, I have a handful of favorites. Because I'm speaking to St. Louis, you guys are a great sports city. I will point out the speech he has about games and sports, in which he describes the games he played when he was growing up in Queens. He played stickball, and he describes that. And he describes a lot of other games I had never even heard of. They're just kind of games that city kids played in the mid-20th century. It's fascinating. It's also very funny because he begins the speech by saying, "I am often asked, to what do I owe my athletic prowess?" And of course, nobody ever asked him that because he spent his life sitting on a bench.
Did your father give more speeches than a normal Supreme Court justice?
I think he delivered more than most, but I wouldn't go so far as to say he delivered more than any. He was a well-known justice, and he was a great speaker. So as a speaker, he was in high demand. And he was a very sociable person, so he liked going out and meeting people, and he liked getting his ideas out there. He thought it was really important to explain his constitutional philosophy, so he was happy to do it. Of course, again, that's not all he spoke about, but he enjoyed it.
Yeah, and he also seemed to connect, right? He had that sort of common touch, even though he was a high ideals, high functioning, but he could also talk to the everyday person to explain his point of view.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, he had an elite education, so in some ways he was an elitist, but he loved turkey hunting. He loved hanging out with what he called good old boys, and he got along with them great. He spoke at the National Turkey Hunting Federation annual convention a couple of times and won an award from them. So, yeah, he definitely had that common touch. Pretty impressive, actually.
The book is called Scalia Speaks, Reflections on Law, Faith, and Life Well Lived. Our guest is Christopher Scalia. He helped edit the book with one of his court clerks. Christopher, good luck, and thanks for checking in.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate your time.
You got it. The book, Scalia Speaks. There you go.
What a nice honor. What a way to honor his father.
Yeah. And you can read these things and the twists and turns, and these when you talk to these Supreme Court, or you read them, and you follow their logic. I do this often with Greg Willard, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're following along. You're like, all right, hold on a second. A to B to C to D. What about F? I'm like, well, and it's that sort of mental, that mental mind game you do with yourself.
Right.
But Anthony Scalia.